Welcome everybody to DynamicsCon March 2022. I hope you have a great conference, a great event, learn lots of cool stuff, and enjoy some great networking amongst your community members. Many thanks to the team at Dynamics User Group for putting on this session and providing this opportunity for all of us to learn and share and hopefully grow. And thanks for joining me for this session. I look forward to presenting to you. My name is Russ Graf, and I'm the Vice President of Channel Management at NetStock. And we are the leading demand planning, inventory planning application in the world. Very excited to have been voted in again to present to you. I think this is my third time presenting, so I really appreciate that. And again, really proud to be a platinum sponsor this year for NetStock. So for the DynamicsCon conference, we're excited about that. It continues our tradition of supporting the Dynamics communities globally, and we're excited to be able to do that. So thanks again to all of your support. Thanks for joining us. And thanks to Dynamics User Group for the opportunity. So our topic today is navigating your supply chain in 2022. So let's go ahead and get started. And remember, we will be live for Q&A after this session. So use the chat function in the dialog boxes here to ask those questions. And then we'll be with you live at the end of this session. So we look forward to that. So first, let's agree on one thing, right? Supply chain disruptions are not going anywhere anytime soon. In fact, we know that disruption is just kind of the natural way of life for supply chain managers. It's always been that way, whether it's because of hurricanes or other natural disasters, might be because of labor strikes or political unrest somewhere, tariffs or trade wars, which we were experiencing pre-COVID, and that was having a real cause of disruption for us. Whatever that is, it's always something. You may recall recently we had a freighter go sideways in the Suez Canal for a period of a week or two, and it completely disrupted portions of our supply chain. So it's one of those things where even rare one-time events like that can create major disruptions and ripple effects across the globe for weeks or even months. And unfortunately, because of the prevalence now of cyber attacks and ransomware, and so forth, that's going to be a growing concern for us. And again, even a 1 or 2 day interruption of our processes can have really major implications. And again, those ripple effects for us. So there's a lot going on. But of course, we're still mired in the greatest disruption of our lifetimes, the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're still experiencing the after effects of the volatile demand that we've experienced as a result, the transportation costs and constraints, right? Rapidly rising transportation challenges there, labor shortages that have really been more evident more recently. And as a result of all those things, increasingly long lead times, incredibly long lead times for some of those products that we need. I mean, we've all experienced that as consumers. Certainly our businesses are experiencing that. So there's never really been a more challenging environment than what we've been in and are still experiencing. Again, we know that as consumers every day. I was fortunate enough to just recently be able to purchase a new home and placing orders for furniture. I've been looking at anywhere from 2-3 weeks to 6-9 months for delivery of some products. So we know if we're experiencing it every day. I saw a phrase somewhere where it talked about that the concept of supply chain has gone from the back room to the living room. And I think it's just never been more evident to all of us. It's probably a phrase that we've heard more often in the last couple of years than we heard in 30 years combined prior to that. So, and unfortunately, at the time of this recording, we're now in day 6 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And when this airs in a couple of weeks, who knows what the impact of that will be. Of course, those of us that are more fortunate, we haven't had to experience these issues. All we can do is really grieve, because we know that the worst impacts of pandemic and war is loss of life and human suffering. And so, to some respects, supply chain disruptions pale in comparison, right? But nonetheless, relative to supply chains, what we've learned through all this disruption and all this upheaval has been that for many businesses, our supply chains have probably gotten too complex. They've become too fragile. and maybe too lean, right? We've always heard that phrase recently of lean management and Six Sigma and lean manufacturing, just-in-time inventory, phrases like that. And those concepts have really been driving a lot of business decision making and supply chains over the last several years. And I think what we may have discovered as a result of this major disruption is that perhaps we had the pendulum swing a little bit too far. And I think what we're seeing is some retrenchment there and some rethinking on the part of thought leaders in this environment. So with that, let's go ahead and continue on and think about some of the current trends that we're experiencing today now, right? So clearly, some of the trends that we're seeing have already been in place prior to the pandemic, but have been accelerated as a result. So things like movement from offshore manufacturing to near or onshore suppliers. Again, one of the one of the challenges of a supply chain that is too complex and a little fragile and dependent on some of these offshore manufacturing environments has become evident to us now. And so we were already seeing a movement towards nearshore, onshore prior to COVID. That has been dramatically accelerated. Clearly, certain things, certain products that are very mass produced with a lot of automation still are probably going to have some advantages, cost advantages by being produced offshore in Asia and markets like that. But if there's any kind of configuration or labor assembly involved that's less automated, I think the cost gap has really narrowed there, and that was already again evident. And now with the addition of transportation costs going through the roof and other challenges in our supply chains, I think we're seeing more again acceleration of those kinds of products being built and manufactured closer to home or right here onshore. And I think in America and North America, that's going to continue to be the case because it's going to be aided by some government support, right? And I'm not as familiar with other regions around the world where that may also be the case, but clearly here with the investment in our infrastructure and some of the other, buy American orientation that we're seeing politically, I think we're going to continue to see that trend to continue to accelerate. Another pre-existing condition, if you will, or trend that was in place was the ongoing digitization of our supply chain. The need to be doing data sharing and collaboration throughout the supply chain. And it's really accelerated exponentially as a result of COVID for a number of reasons, right? The need for timely, accurate information because of the volatility was never more important. And so the requirement to be nimble and reacting to all the upheaval and all the disruption was really critical. The fact that our teams were working at home, working remotely for periods of time, required new investment in some of that technology to allow that. And so the whole digitization of the supply chain, the whole data sharing collaboration function that was already trending that direction really got accelerated. There's never been a greater need for that, in fact. And it requires automation, it requires technology, it requires standards that get applied and get deployed where we can be consistently communicating on a digital level with our suppliers and with our customers. And for that matter, to the next level, our suppliers, and our customers, right? So that level of communication has certainly required that we get smarter about how we automate all those different levels of communication within the supply chain. And then, the last point on this slide is a little more subtle, perhaps, maybe a newer trend for some of you, but it's this concept of supply chain sustainability, right? And I really kind of like that word. It really has three components: the acronym ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And clearly, as the science has evolved and we understand more what's going on with climate change and in general our impact on the environment of our business activities, it's imperative that we all understand that, recognize it, take responsibility for it, and take action the best we can to try to minimize the supply chain's impact on the environment. We'll probably be looking at things like carbon taxes that will be applied to us at some point as we deal with climate change. So, whether that's in materials or how we package product, how we manufacture it, how we transport it, Again, reducing the level of and amount of transportation, the amount of complexity in those supply chains can reduce that footprint and that environmental impact. And supply chain managers are certainly now considering that, the environmental impacts of really almost every decision that we're making in terms of sourcing and outsourcing, et cetera. It's the right thing to do, and it's good business because our customers are now asking that of us. In addition to the environmental issues, there's the social impacts, which are becoming quite a bit a larger consideration now over the last few years, right? Especially in the world now of social media. There's cameras everywhere. There's the ability to immediately go viral on YouTube and Twitter and so forth, and different social platforms that expose challenges and negative impacts that we might have from a social perspective. So, and then now, especially with younger generations, millennials and youngers than them, coming into decision-making roles and executive roles in our organizations, they're just much more social consciousness. There's much more awareness that they've grown up with in that regard. So it's really critical for all manufacturers, distributors, and suppliers to make sure that things like labor laws and safety standards are being adhered to all the way through our supply chain, right? In fact, major customers of yours, especially if they're publicly traded, may stop ordering from you if you can't validate and verify that their supply chain and your role in that supply chain all the way down through your suppliers are not in compliance with some of that more modern progressive thinking in terms of social and, of course, government standards and regulations, right? So as managers are looking to make changes in their supply chains, maybe especially as they look at alternative vendors or different sources of product, that really has to be taken seriously. That's got to be a major consideration. And you'll see this phrase sustainability and the acronym ESG showing up in a lot of the literature that's talking about some of the improvements and trends in supply chain going forward, which I think is a great thing, right? It's the right thing to do. So another phrase you'll hear is this concept of building a resilient supply chain. So if we drill down a little bit more on some of these trends that we just talked about, you'll hear this phrase, the resilient supply chain. And I like this term because it really recognizes that disruption has always been the nature of this game, right? It's always been the way of life in supply chain. And so if that's the case, then let's just prepare to deal with it, right? Let's do what we can to build resiliency. Let's know that disruption is going to occur and try to do our best to mitigate those risks, to build a certain amount of agility and nimbleness in our approach to the supply chain. And again, it really comes down to mitigating risk. So there's a few things we can do which include diversifying our suppliers, right? We talked a little bit about this with the move towards nearshoring and onshoring, but as part of that, it's really about maybe identifying multiple sources for some of your key components, key commodities, raw materials from different suppliers, so that, and maybe even having those come through different ports, right? So that if I have a challenge in a particular part of the country or particular port, that maybe that allows me to have to hedge my bet a little bit to, again, mitigate that risk by having different ports that we can leverage to bring product in. So it's a multi-year effort. It's not something you can snap a finger, flip a switch, and have that sort of resiliency built in. But it's something that you need to get started on, be thinking about. If you haven't already begun that journey, I would encourage you to start thinking about that and start that project, that as you look a year or 2, 3 down the road, that you'll be in a much better position to manage those kinds of risks. And by the way, I'm not suggesting that you just identify secondary suppliers, but really actually make use of them, right? Actually purchase from them on occasion, build those relationships, stay current with whatever their processes are, their paperwork, their workflow, their approval processes, et cetera, so that if you need them in a pinch, that you're ready, right? Not that you just have them kind of on the list and on the bench, never leverage them, and then when you need them, they don't know who you are, and they're slow to react to your requirements. So if you can kind of keep that relationship in place, purchase from them regularly, stay current with their processes, I think that would put you in good stead, so that in case you need them, you're ready to go. So in addition to the diversity on the supplier side, we talk about implementing redundant systems. So redundancy it can be referred to a couple different ways, can be thought of a couple different ways, but basically being willing to adjust your assumptions on a regular basis, right? Or as often as needed. We think about certain data points as we look at supply chain analysis and inventory planning and so forth, things like lead times, safety stocks, replenishment cycles, economic order quantities, et cetera. And those need to now be dynamic data points, not static, right? It's not a set it and forget it type of parameter. I can recall earlier in my career as an ERP consultant, where we would spend a lot of time building these different data points within the vendor master file and item master files, right? Things like, again, lead times and reorder points, et cetera. And we put a lot of effort into that. We'd go live on the new ERP system or the upgrade, whatever we had just gone through. And typically within 6-9 months, a lot of that data was fairly obsolete. And it was not easy to make those updates, right? Typically it involved dumping data out to an Excel spreadsheet, making the changes there, maybe building some macros to do that, and then re-importing that data back into those master files. And of course, everybody had to be out of the system when you were doing that and those kinds of things. So it was not easy, tended to be put off, right, and delayed. And so we were often dealing with obsolete data after some period of time. And nowadays, I think that data is likely to be obsolete within weeks rather than months, right? Because of the dynamic nature of our supply chains on how quickly things are being disrupted and changed. That's really a challenge. And so those data points really need to be very dynamic. And that's what we really are talking about here by having that redundancy. And again, the secondary supplier relationships play a role there as well. And I think finally, we just need to increase your capacity for risk, right? By increasing kind of our what if scenario planning, doing more extensive data modeling, right? Looking at different scenarios and doing some what if there. What if this occurred? What if that occurred? Would we be ready? How would we handle it? To be able to quickly react to those changes in our environment. I mean, I think certainly, again, we have these issues on the supply side, but this piece can also be very impactful on the demand side of the equation, right? What if our demand falls through the floor or goes through the roof? What if we sign this contract or lose this customer? Those kinds of things that impact our demand side of the equation can be really helpful if we can do some of that data modeling and what if scenario, so forth. So, and I think another trend that I didn't actually add to this slide, but thought of as I was preparing for this session, is really a trend towards middle market firms in the supply chain environment to, as a direct result of the pandemic disruptions, really see a stronger role for supply chain managers and this whole function in the overall corporate strategy. Owners and executives of small and medium-sized businesses now have a much greater appreciation, probably more than ever, for how critical this function is in the organization. Larger firms have always had a history of more or less a formal process that is referred to as sales and operations planning, or S&OP. And so big firms have always kind of done this last couple of decades. It's been pretty standard operating procedure, which really is a function of internal collaboration, bringing all the different constituencies and departments within the organization together on a regular basis and sharing a common set of data, right, to really understand where they're at in their supply chain, what are their complexities, what are their compromises, what are their challenges, what are the capacities from a manufacturing standpoint, from a warehousing standpoint? What are they capable of doing? What do they need to do? What is the market demanding of them? And putting all of that together from a finance and operational procedural perspective and in an inventory investment decision that now mirrors or reflects that policy, right? That common understanding that has been built amongst those different constituencies. That is now becoming much more prominent in the small and medium-sized business as a result of the impact of the COVID supply chain disruptions, right? Again, smaller firms are now realizing how critically important this is, and that we've got to get our teams communicating better, and especially having that common set of data and understanding of what's going on within the environment, so that we can build policies and procedures and targets, and then have our operations folks execute against that target properly, right? Here's the proper level of investment. Here's why. And here's what we think based on these assumptions today. And let's revisit this on a regular basis to make sure that those policies are still making sense, and that our targets and metrics are still on track, right? I think that concept of, in small and medium-sized businesses, the supply chain folks now having a seat at the table, being part of that discussion, is a major trend that I think is not going to reverse. I think that's now a permanent thing. And our universities are now producing some really talented young folks with supply chain degrees that will bring kind of an academic perspective to that and blend that in with the long-term tribal knowledge of some of our team members. And I think if we take advantage of that and bring those different perspectives in, those middle market firms that typically are Dynamics ERP users, right, are going to be well served as a result of that. So the next thing to drill into a little bit more is how we can monitor our supplier performance, right? Again, it's about identifying risk. Clearly, the supply side of the equation has really been a sore spot lately. We talked about the lead times and so forth. So we really need to truly understand what those risk profiles look like across our suppliers. And there's that word risk again, right? We've heard it several times already. And that's really, if you think about what supply chain management it's about, right? It's about managing risk and mitigating risks. And these days, that's especially a risk to availability, right? Now, sometimes the demand side of the equation is what's creating a risk to availability. I'm selling more. There's more demand than I ever expected. So now I've got a risk of being able to have that product available for all my customers that need it and want it. But more often than not these days, and hopefully this will level off a little bit over the course of the next year or two. But more than often this year, at this time, it's really a supply side challenge that we're seeing, right? It's something that's not going to go away anytime soon. Has to do with all these transportation issues and so forth. So again, identifying secondary suppliers and other ports that we can bring that stuff in is important. But not only that, but building those relationships again, right? Identifying, working with those suppliers, and then trying to regionalize and localize and bring some of those suppliers closer to you. Again, simplifying the supply chain, and then monitoring how those suppliers are performing, and leveraging newer technology to give you that visibility to and the analytics that you need to really be able to make sound data-based decisions, right? Not just gut feel, but based on data. Really keeping an eye on how you can simplify that supply chain. And it's not just, are my suppliers delivering on time, but are they also delivering in full? Or if I get an on-time shipment, but it's only half of what I needed, right? I need to understand that and have that impact my ordering decisions and my safety stock or buffer stock levels to accommodate that risk. And another factor is I may get a supplier that provides an estimated delivery date for my product that I've ordered, and they change that date, right? I think the last statistic I saw is that 70% of all purchase orders now get updated dates of delivery from the original date that was expected when the PO was issued. And if that only happens once on a given PO, that's probably something we can manage and deal with a little bit better. But if that same date for that same PO gets adjusted multiple times before the product ever comes in, that's a level of supplier performance that we need to be aware of. That adds a layer of complexity and challenge to the supply chain management effort, right? So some things to think about there. So leveraging that technology to give you that visibility really makes an awful lot of sense and really helps you as a supply chain manager increase your profitability and increase your performance. So, up till now, we've been mostly focusing on the supply side of the equation, and rightly so, again, given today's constraints that we're all aware of now. But that doesn't mean we should ignore, the demand side, if you will, the challenges of demand planning and forecasting that exist as well. Because today we also see wild volatility there. And depending on where your firm sits in the chain, right? If you're a manufacturer or a wholesaler, a distributor, a retailer, depending on where you are in that supply chain, you may be experiencing what's known as the whiplash effect, right? So the demand goes crazy, uh, because of incremental smaller demands further up the supply chain, right? From the end user and consumer level. And so the volatility that's created by that whiplash effect, by overbuying and then not needing to buy, right? If you think about our own personal examples again, when COVID shutdowns first hit, right, we couldn't get some necessities like toilet paper and other things on the grocery store shelves. It's because people were buying way too much, hoarding it, and eventually everybody had more than they needed for a period of time, and so then the demand fell through the floor. So that volatility is really challenging. I think the worst of that is probably over now in terms of the COVID impacts, but there still are going to be sporadic instances of that, and so you really have some challenges to figure out what's the proper level of demand that we can expect. So this area also requires good data. It requires rapid kind of predictive analysis, and again, some of that data modeling and testing and what if scenarios to really drive some smart decision making along those lines. It's a good time to be thinking about the products that you stock, right? And make sure that you can justify that investment. As we indicate here on this slide, some of the top brands around the globe have been really doing that, what we call rationalizing their mix of SKUs and determining, first of all, do we even need all these products? You know, which ones are most profitable and easiest for us to manage and so forth. And then secondarily, even if we want to offer those products, do we need to necessarily stock them, right? Could we be outsourcing some of this to a vendor managed inventory level? And so if you're on that part of the supply chain, maybe you've got your customers asking you to manage that inventory for them. And so for you to be able to do that again is another expectation and another demand on your time and another requirement of additional analysis and data tracking to really be able to keep a handle on that and make sure that you're doing that well. You know, the increase in the amount of drop shipping that exists in the market today is a reflection of that, right? So if you're not stocking the inventory, but you're placing the order and then it's immediately going to your vendor to be drop shipped to your end user, now you're not inventorying that, but you've got to have those systems in place and processes in place to manage that. So you've got to really monitor that forecast performance, just like we do suppliers. All right, how well are our forecasts performing? Are we selling more or less? And not waiting till the end of a period to do that, but ongoing, right? If I'm halfway through the month and I expected 100 SKUs to be sold, 100 units, and I'm halfway through the month and I've only got 10 sold, I'm going to have a hard time maybe hitting that expectation. I can make those adjustments real time earlier that now it may impact my manufacturing or my purchasing decisions as a result of that fluctuation in demand. And so we're seeing certainly some good applications there for things like machine learning and artificial intelligence on the demand statistical analysis side. Lots of things going on there. But back to that collaboration that I talked about and that data sharing topic that I talked about, I think this is an area where forward-thinking firms are really sharing data with their suppliers about their future requirements. If you can identify through a good solid forecasting process what your requirements are going to be to meet that demand from your suppliers, whether that's commodities or subcomponents or raw materials, whatever that is, and if you can share that information with your suppliers and say, Mr. Supplier, here's what I'm expecting to purchase from you in the next 3 months, 6 months, even 12 months, especially with the long lead times again that we're experiencing these days, or maybe it's 18 months, right? Provide that picture, that forecast, that future state with your suppliers. That gives them the opportunity to get prepared to be able to meet those requirements. That's a great area for data sharing and for communication. It's a great way to build positive relationships with your suppliers that pay dividends in a lot of different ways over time because you've been helping them be successful. And maybe that entails going to their suppliers and making sure that their suppliers have what they need for your suppliers to produce what you need from them, et cetera. So again, that communication all the way up and down the chain to new levels within that chain are really what's required and is really a trend that we're seeing today in successful organizations. So it's all about data, right? And we know that ERPs like Dynamics ERPs that are represented in this audience, provide a great deal of quality data, but what we really need that data to be timely. We need it to be relevant, right? So it's all about data, and we know that again, your ERPs are doing a great job, give you a great foundation of capturing all the transaction detail that goes into order entry on the PO side and on the sales side, all the inventory data, all that good transactional information that's very well organized and well presented within the ERPs. That's awesome. But having said that, it doesn't typically give you the whole picture, right? There are additional data points. There's different calculated results, things like safety stock calculations and leveraging these forecast predictions that really are needed to give you the full visibility into your supply chain and the health of your inventory levels and so forth. So today's forward-thinking firms are really leveraging, how do we get more data? How is it relevant? How do we get access to it, share it within our organization and without the organization? What are the predictive and prescriptive analytics that we can rely on? Give me some dashboards, give me some visuals that really help me interpret the data so that I can look at, again, that future state and make adjustments on the fly now when things aren't going according to plan, right? Whether, again, on the supply side or the demand side. So really looking at quality forecasts and those dashboards of key metrics to give you that true picture of the health of your inventory and your levels and the performance of your supply chain members. And really what it comes down to then is making good purchase or production recommendations to keep or create that balanced inventory level, right? So it's all about data, right? Data. And again, the digitization of the supply chain supports that picture, right? So we think about going forward now, how do you position yourself for success? And it, again, really comes down to the right tools. If you've seen me do other presentations, oftentimes we talk about the kind of the triumvirate of people, process, and technology. Clearly, you've got to have the right people on the team in the right place. You've got to give them the right processes to follow and consistent procedures and check boxes and so forth, workflows that are consistent and productive and make sense. Clearly, those are important. But it's also my perspective that to do that, to give your people the best chance of following those best practices, procedures, you also have to give them the right tools. You've got to invest in the right solutions that encourage that collaboration, right? Remove those data silos, increase that visibility across the business, right? Give us a version that executives can look at with a quick snapshot and dashboard, and let us get a granular drill down, drill around capability for the staff workers, the warehouse workers, manufacturing teams, to really get to see what they need to see, give them the view that is pertinent to them. So you really got to give them the right tools to do that. And I think, especially given the labor market that we're in these days, you really got to rely on that data-driven technology and that automation to two things: enable your talent to do more, right, to be more productive, but secondly, to also, again, mitigate risk of losing a key employee that maybe is taking with them a ton of tribal knowledge and understanding of how your systems work. If you can systematize these processes, you are less reliant and dependent and less at risk if you lose that key employee, right? And so the old way of dumping data to a spreadsheet, trying to do the analysis and do the formulas and on a batch basis, maybe once a week or even less frequently, trying to get a refresh of that data, those days are gone. We really have to mobilize our systems to provide data insights on a daily basis, alert us when something's gone wrong, right? Expose where I have a challenge very quickly so that I can react quickly accordingly. We talk about this as a supply chain, which implies links. There's links in the chain, and that's true from a technology perspective as well. So if you've got an ERP foundation, you may have many other tools that bolt on or enhance functionality within that ERP. Warehouse management solutions. Obviously, I've got to understand where my product is and how much I have and so forth to be able to do analytics against that. EDI applications, e-commerce applications, and certainly inventory planning and forecasting applications. all those things collaborate and work together to provide that solid supply chain. And what you need to be thinking about is, where's that weakest link today? Is it in my warehouse management? Is it in my e-commerce environment? Is it in my planning environment? Where's that weakest link? Attack that, fix that, solve it, make improvements there, and then reassess, right? Rinse and repeat. Now I fix that link. Where's the next weakest link? Is it my shipping automation application? Fix that, upgrade that, make that better. And if you continue to do that over time with that continuous improvement sort of approach and model, you can't help but go the right directions, right? And see improvement in your supply chains and the health of your inventory as you go. So with that, I thought I would leave you with just a couple of additional thoughts and resources. I'm constantly reading and leveraging other thought leaders and trying to keep my finger on the pulse based on what they're hearing and what they're providing. And there are some great folks out there to do that, and I would recommend them. One is our own blog site at netstock.co. It's called the Inventory Mentor. So that's our blog that has all kinds of good content, educational, thought leadership, some great advice. And I would encourage you to subscribe to that. We recently did a webinar, a global webinar with a gentleman by the name of Nicholas Vandeput. I think he's out of Denmark, a published author and a real leader in thinking about some of these best practices for inventory and supply chains going forward. I would imagine there's a recording of that out on our website, maybe on our LinkedIn page as well. But I would encourage you to look up Nicholas and maybe look at some of his writings and the book that he published, maybe more than one. Then there's someone here in the Western U.S., a gal by the name of Lisa Anderson, who I've gotten to know over the years. Really a strong player, APEX certified, really knows her stuff, especially in the manufacturing environment. She recently produced a document, a kind of an ebook that took insights from 22 different sources, including the CEO of our firm, NetStock, that contributed to that. I would encourage you to go out to her website at LMA Consulting Group, subscribe to her newsletter. She's very prolific author and produces a lot of great content that would be very helpful to all of you. So I encourage you to learn about Lisa Anderson. Then a couple of other folks that we've had the pleasure of working with and will continue to going forward. A gentleman by the name of Daniel Stanton, who's known as Mr. Supply Chain, also very prolific on LinkedIn. I would encourage you to go to his LinkedIn page and connect, follow him. And another gentleman by the name of Michael Ryan, whose tagline is the Inventory Iceberg Crusher, which I love. Michael's a great source of information. He's out there rolling up his sleeves, working with clients, and really understanding what's going on in the real world and sharing that information with all of us. So a couple of additional resources. I'm happy to be a resource. I'm happy to talk with any of you anytime. Hopefully we'll have an opportunity again at the end of this session to leverage what you've put into the chat function and answer those questions. We'll be live here in a minute to do that. But even beyond that, if you hit our booth here at the show, there's other content you could download. Reach out to me at my email address. I'd be happy to continue the conversation with you and learn from you, right? Share with me what you're experiencing so that I can share that with others as I have the opportunity to do that. So thank you again for your time and attention. Really appreciate it. And with that, we'll conclude and we'll see you live for a Q&A in just a minute. Thank you. All right, here we are live for Q&A. Hi, Naja, how are you?
Hi, Russ. How's it going?
It's going well. So happy to spend a few minutes here with some of the Q&A process here. We've got a couple of questions, and maybe I'll start with addressing some of those. And Naja, maybe you can moderate, see if there's some additional ones that maybe I miss, and or bring some other topics to bear here. One of the earlier ones came from Molly regarding this concept of understanding the environmental impact of our supply chains and so forth, and what's a good first step there. And my response in the chat is, I think first, like any problem solving, right? First, you have to kind of recognize the problem and recognize that this is a priority. And I think a lot of that comes from executive sponsorship and somebody up in the leadership of the company saying, hey, this is important to us. This is part of our values as a business, to be responsible in this area. And so I think that's where it starts. But then beyond that, I think there's just an awful lot of good content out there that you can research. I mentioned a couple of resources there at the end of the recorded session, and there's plenty of others and some good topics out there. And again, if you're bringing in some younger folks from supply chain programs in colleges these days, I'm sure it's a current topic, and they've probably got some new forward thinking on, what that compliance looks like and how to calculate some of these impacts and so forth. So I think there's some good resources out there, but it starts with a commitment, right? It starts with an agreement from the top down that says, yeah, this is something that's important to us. And so I wanted to emphasize that. I see another question there also regarding, yes, we recorded this session a couple of weeks ago. And of course, I think I may have mentioned early on that at the time of the recording, we were probably in maybe day 5 or day 6 or something of the invasion into Ukraine from Russia. And of course, that's still ongoing and obviously horrific to see what's going on in the news there. But from a supply chain perspective, some of the things that I'm hearing about that is kind of indirect. I think a lot of folks don't realize how critical the Ukraine is for production of a lot of raw materials. They're not necessarily a manufacturing hub like China would be or other locations would be in terms of our supply chain, but there's an awful lot of raw materials, minerals and chemicals and things like that come out of Ukraine. And so it's a little bit further down the supply chain, but there's no question that some of our manufacturers and suppliers that rely on those raw materials are now going to start feeling a pinch. So that is yet another major disruption that is coming our way. And it just seems like every time we think we're about to emerge from COVID or something else going on, we get hit with another major blow. So again, obviously a critically important, human challenge there going on in Ukraine. But beyond that, we will definitely see some supply chain impacts as well. I would imagine, there's a lot of key raw materials coming out of there. So I think that addresses that one. Anything else you're seeing in the chat at this point, Naja, or topic you had in mind?
It looks like that was all for the chat, but some other topics. So was wondering, what would you say are like the main indicators that a business has an optimized supply chain?
It's an interesting topic. I mean, I think this time of year, most businesses have been through kind of a year-end physical count. And so we're all busy now writing off dead inventory off our balance sheet, off the books, or we're going through an audit process in that regard. So that's one of the more obvious indicators, right? If we're writing off a lot of inventory because we've got a lot of dead stock, then we probably don't have a very optimized inventory. But unfortunately, that's a little bit late in the game, right? It's too late to find that out now after the fact when I can't really make any adjustments to it. So, there's probably more dynamic, better ways to understand that. Of course, I'm a technology person, right? I believe that the best way to do that is to get ahead of the curve and to have ongoing real-time dynamic information as to the health of your inventory, whether that's in a dashboard or in some sort of a BI tool or whatever that is, to give you that real-time understanding, right? As I mentioned, all these things that we set up in vendor files and inventory item master files that years ago were pretty static and you could count on them for a while in terms of being valid. Now those data points are obsolete within weeks, if not days. So this is the dynamic nature of it that has really become a challenge for most businesses, especially small, medium-sized businesses. And you just have to deploy technology on a regular basis to get that snapshot. So year end, that's one indicator. If I'm writing off a lot of inventory, that's a problem, but you really need to be more real time than that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. That was something Nicholas Vandeput had mentioned in one of the webinars we did a while back about proactive versus
Yep.
reactive.
Yep.
So that's a really good point there. I think that is going to be a
Yeah.
repeating theme for a lot of people.
In fact, I mentioned Nicholas in my resources section there, of the wrap up of the recorded session. And since then, I think, haven't we now scheduled a second presentation with Nicholas and somebody else, another global expert in supply chain? We have something else coming up?
Yes, so we're going to be doing another webinar with Nicholas and an influencer in South Africa named Jan Tucker. I'll just
Okay.
drop the link for the registration here. And our
that'd be great.
topic is how to deal with unpredictable supply chain lead times.
Okay.
So very much a hot topic right now for everybody.
Yeah, no question about it, especially with the transportation challenges going on, right? There's a constraint on how many containers are available. There's still challenges at the ports and unloading those containers and getting those things turned around. So there's a lot of volatility there. So okay, so that's great. So I see the link in the chat. Well, that's in our private. You want to put it in the
Yes,
public chat as well. So we'll get you. But if you miss this, hit our website, watch our LinkedIn page, and we'll have other locations there for you to get registered and track the progress of that. But I think that'll be very useful.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Here we are.
There we go. Thank you. So it looks like we're coming up to the end of the Q&A. Anything else before we wrap it up? I guess I'd just like to thank everybody for their time and attention. Appreciate getting voted in again through the crowdsourcing process here at DynamicsCon to get this presentation out to you. Really would be happy to speak with any of you at any time. Reach out to us. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. Be happy to connect with you. And again, I would like to learn from you, right? Give me your feedback on what you're seeing. If you're an end user, if you're in the supply chain, what you're experiencing. If you're a partner, supporting, implementing Dynamics applications, and you're getting feedback from your customers in this regard, love to hear from you, because all that intelligence, if you will, all that information, all those different data points, can coalesce and really come out with some good results, and we're happy to share that information. So feel free to please reach out to me and let me know how I can help.
Yeah, we can continue these conversations in the forum as well.
Right. Yeah. Come stop and see our booth at the session here during the next 3 days. Hope you have a great DynamicsCon conference. Yeah. Come visit us, chat with us there. Let us know, get us your contact information if you'd like us to reach out, learn a little bit more about who we are at Netstock and how we approach this. So again, happy to do that, and hope you all have a great next couple of days here at DynamicsCon.
Sounds good. Enjoy, everybody.
Thanks, Nadja.
Thanks, Russ. Bye-bye.